the timing that you joined the Navy in 2001.
Yeah.
It's very interesting timing. Like anybody that joined the military, especially pursuing a combat role.
Yeah.
You can't ignore the proximity to September 11th. So I think, did you join prior to that? Is that what you said? You had joined prior to the September 11th attacks?
Yeah. So I was in boot camp, in Navy boot camp when 9/11 happened.
Let's talk about that, because I think you've mentioned that a lot of the SEALs that came before you had spent very little time, if any, in combat.
Yeah.
And this will lead into a tactics conversation, but what was the overall like mood in the teams, especially for like some of these new guys that like it was a badass role, badass unit, but it was like official now. You guys, like you said, you were going to get into this pipeline to be shipped off to war. You were going to see combat. Yeah. Like what was that?
I mean, even in BUDS, like I remember BUDS instructors were more violent towards students because you're going to war now. You know what I mean? Like this is serious, guys. Like you're like trying to weed out even further because like you guys are actually going to go sling lead overseas.
Wow.
And you know, this is real for you guys. Before that, like in the 90s, it was all Clinton era guys that saw no combat, you know, and they didn't even get that great of gear or training. You know, I was total Bush era, and we got anything gear was, you know, like a friggin' candy store throwing you stuff and good trips and that first, you know, those first rotations overseas, a lot of those, I mean, pretty much all of the older guys had never actually fired their weapons in combat. I mean, even SEAL Team 6, which is in Virginia as well, which is called Development Group, you know, even they weren't seeing combat. I mean, there was some isolated little tiny things, you know, going on, you know, here and there, but it's not like the movies where you think team guys are just jumping out of helicopters and airplanes, you know, going on these secret missions all over the world. It's not like that at all.
Like I said, this leads into, I think, a tactics conversation we've talked offline about, but like explain how that going from guys that had not been in combat a whole lot, well-trained, serious dudes, but had not spent the time in combat like guys of your era that, you know, fought in the global war on terror. What effect did that have on tactics?
It had an effect on our tactics across the board because honestly, much of our tactics, you know, not only including CQB or CQC, but land warfare tactics were Vietnam stuff. Because really, if you look at it like from the SEAL perspective, like Vietnam was the last time team guys were in like heavy combat.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, you know, in high school, I read like every Vietnam SEAL book you could imagine, you know, which was cool for me. Like when we started going overseas in the wars, because, you know, in Vietnam, they called team guys the men with green faces because some VC would just, they'd show up and, you know, some VC would get stabbed, you know, in the face by a man with a green face. And then in the wars, like early on in Afghanistan, especially with team guys rotating over there and stuff, you know, they didn't know that we had this night vision technology and all that stuff. Conventional units did not operate at night. Only we did, for the most, or soft units for the most part. And you know, they would intercept cell phone traffic and stuff from some of these Taliban guys that we were, you know, hitting targets on. And they basically say they would be creeped out and screaming on their phones to their other Taliban guys saying, the men with green eyes are here, the men with green eyes, because all you see is that little green glow, from, you know, behind the nods.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah.
And basically, if the men with green eyes showed up, you're all dead. You're all dying. And they were very scared of them. So that was kind of nostalgic for me with, you know, reading all those books, you know, in high school about the men with green faces. But back to your original, you know, point, like, so those tactics were all old because for decades they hadn't been battle tested. So we start rotating overseas. Guys are experiencing actually getting shot at from hardened opposition on targets, and they're like, "Whoa, why this doesn't work, guys?" You know, like a lot of stuff came out of the wars.
What was it that wasn't working?
Particularly with regard to CQB or CQC, which is essentially called close quarter clearance or close quarter battle.
What's the difference? Are they the same thing, or?
They're the same thing. CQB is kind of like an older school, like a 90s era type name. I mean, it was called CQB when I first came in, but now it's called CQ, close quarter combat. I call it close quarter clearance because it's essentially clearance of a structure inside some, you know, small spaces, you know, clearing rooms and spaces inside a structure. That changed, you know, drastic. I'd say amongst all the tactics in the SEAL teams, that changed dramatically when guys started rotating overseas. Because before that, it was all what you call hostage rescue style CQC or dynamic CQC, where you're busting into a room as fast as you can, hair's on fire, you know, multiple guys, you know, as many dudes as you can get in that room, and you're just, you know, clearing the room and stuff. And when I showed up, as a new guy at the team, that's how we did everything.
So you had actually shown me a Charlie Sheen movie that was so accurate.
One of the greatest SEAL movies ever.
The greatest SEAL movies. Can we actually pull that up, Irving? I want to see that. Do you have that in the link by any chance?
I have a scene from that movie. I don't have the scene that he showed us.
What scene was it that you particularly showed me that was just absolute chaos?
I show the scene in my CQC classes where they bust in and they're coming out of the roof and breaking through the glass and they're all coming in and I'm just like, yeah, this isn't how we do things in real life.
But I do want to talk about like with your class. So like today, you've created vanilla guerrilla security. Not today, but like modern day. And so you're teaching law enforcement agencies, you're teaching civilians some of these tactics that have evolved over time and that have been battle tested, proven to work.
Yeah.
What are some of the things, like just in a nutshell, maybe this is hard to kind of condense, but like what are some of the things that you're teaching these organizations now and showing them? You talk about like this hair on fire, intense, dynamic, tactics and strategies. Like what are you showing now?
So, what we learned real quick in the wars was with dudes that wanted to throw down, and a lot of these guys were in it to win it, man, fundamentalists. And when you have
enemies, you're saying,
when you have these types of combatants, guys you're going against that are ready to shoot you when you come through that threshold of that door. They're in there and they're armed to the teeth and they're slinging lead. When you run into spaces, like the typical old school, even the old school SWAT, shows you watch and different stuff like that, someone's dying. Someone's going to take rounds at the end of the day. Now, in a hostage rescue situation, like you have to go dynamically into a space, meaning you come up to that room and boom, violence of action. You're in that space and you dominate it. But only in a hostage rescue situation, should that be done. And in that case, you are essentially placing the life of the hostage or the innocent person above yours. And so you're willing to take that risk. But 90 something percent of the missions that we did overseas were just capture, kill, just jerks with guns. And why are we running in, so not only early on, we would land like the helicopters on the target and then we'd hit the target and then we'd, flying into these rooms, trying to clear them. And so now they know we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're waiting for us in rooms. And now we open that door. Guess what's coming through that door? Lead.
Yeah. And
guys are getting ate up. And very quickly they're like, hey, why are we doing this, guys? I was in high school, I was a big paintball dork, and that's what my buddies and I did and spent all my money on paintball stuff. And, but like I remember we would go to this old Western village and when we play paintball, and when you play paintball, it's sneaking, it's hunting. You're like peeking around stuff. You're looking for other dudes to shoot. And then that's kind of how I was used to doing CQC or, that type of stuff. And I get in the teams and we're just running into rooms with our hair on fire, shooting live fire. The instructors are in the cadre above us, screaming at us, throwing water bottle, like yelling at us while we're doing it. And I'm like, this feels out of control. And it's like, but this is a SEAL team. It's like, this is how they do it. This is how they do business. And a couple years, a year or two into the wars, back to paintball.
Wow.
Where you're popping a door or you're coming up to an opening of a space and you're slowly starting to pie around using distance and angles and cover and concealment. What you have outside of that room, into your tactical advantage and seeing as much into that space, situational awareness into that space before you commit to it, because then you have options. Like if you come up to a door and there's a dude ready to throw down in there, you pop that door and lead starts coming through it, like you have options, right? You can get off the target, you can frag rooms like we did, you can throw frags in, I know obviously in the law enforcement world that's not applicable, but you have options at that point. Once if you dynamically enter that space immediately, you're committed to that space.
Wow.
And you could potentially get in 50-50 gunfight with a dude and someone's going to die.
What an expensive price to pay though. Just having to learn it the hard way. This isn't something like...
And the thing is like, unfortunately, a lot of these tactics that we developed in the wars were paid in blood because guys, and I hate to say this, but like because of a little bit of arrogance and pride in the way guys did things, that were older before, they didn't want to shift over to what we call deliberate CQC, or early on in the wars was called combat clearance, we called it, but then now it's called deliberate CQC. But they didn't want to shift because, the older guys were like, that's not aggressive. because it's slower. It's more calculated. It's more methodical in the way that you approach, your angles and in these spaces. And, I kind of equate it to like these SWAT teams that I work with. They'll be like, hey, how many hunters you got? You're a handful of dudes, we hunt, whatever. Well, if you're out in the woods and there's a tree, like you don't bust around that tree. And be like, oh yeah, and shoot your.
That's how I hunt.
And kick the branch out of your way and just charge
and shoot your prey like like the Kool-Aid man, like, oh yeah, like no, like you enter that space and there's a dude ready to shoot, like, oh no, like you're getting rounds in the face, like it's not gonna work out well for you. So like if you're hunting, what are you doing? You're like slowly peeking around that tree, and essentially, you're hunting humans. Mm-hmm. So the same principles apply, and so. It took a while for it to develop and shift and change and get fully integrated, in all of the training cells, because the way the training cells work, at the team is the training cells are all filled with, team guys, and then they train the team. So like the teams go through the training cells, which all have cadre that are team guys. But for it to get fully incorporated on both coasts, East and West, now the development group guys, which most of my close friends at Team 2 all went over there for careers, but they started doing it before the white side teams did. I talked earlier about like, the East Coast having 2, 4, 8, and 10.
Right.
Well, they also have 6.
Okay.
Which is, 6 is the Hollywood name.
Mm-hmm.
The actual name is Development Group.
I wasn't aware of that. You
have to do like at least 2 rotations, at or 2 platoons at one of the white side teams, and then you can go trial for Development Group. Okay. And they were some of the first dudes over in Afghanistan doing stuff. So they started they really were the ones that started to see this first, and then got like some of their best tacticians together at their command and said, hey, we need to come up with an entire new system to do CQC. And then it eventually got filtered into the white side teams on the East Coast first, because again, you had, they're on the East Coast. They're just not at Little Creek. They're at Dam Neck Naval Base. And so, which is why like most of the guys in the teams, if you go over to, Development Group, you just say, oh, dude went over to Dam Neck because it's just a different base. Mm-hmm. But they started, telling us some of this stuff. One of my deployments, I had one of my buddies that had gone over there, and he was telling me some of this stuff, and then I was talking to my chief about it. We started to kind of incorporate some of these things internally in our platoon before we went to Fallujah, before it was even incorporated like across the board in our training cell, training cells, because it was saving dudes' lives, and so instead of landing on the target and then running into these rooms with our hair on fire trying to kill dudes, we would get dropped off by helicopters and do offset infills where we'd hike in, for, quite a ways, like secretly. And then we'd hit them, quietly at night. You go in some of these places and they're still sleeping. Make little noise as possible. If you don't have to explosive breach, don't breach. Sneak in somewhere else so they don't know you're there.
Hey, thanks for watching this clip. If you want to see the full podcast, be sure to click on the link in the description. And if you feel like it, hit subscribe.